Would Donald Trump send the A-10 Warthog to Ukraine? Congress just told the U.S. Air Force, no, you're not getting rid of the A-10. And that single move quietly reopens the question I've covered before. Could the Warthog end up in Ukraine as a cheap, nasty drone hunter? Because if the Air Force is stuck keeping a chunk of the fleet alive anyway, the argument shifts from the A-10 is gone to the A-10 is available. And yes, that should make Moscow very nervous. Mostly because they panic when the West finds a spare wrench. Isn't that right, Mr. Putin? Huh? Ugh. Hey friends, Wes here, veteran, law grad, and the guy who reads defense bills so that you don't have to ruin your weekend. And like many former infantrymen, I have a special place in my heart for the A-10 Warthog. So, could Ukraine ever get the A-10? Well, here's the new development. Lawmakers negotiating the final 2026 National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, moved to block the Air Force from retiring the entire remaining A-10 fleet in 2026. The Air Force wanted to retire all 162 A-10s still flying and 21 F-15E Strike Eagles just for funsies, starting next year. Now, the conference bill said nope, and it would limit A-10 retirements in that period to 59 aircraft while blocking F-15E retirements completely. By the way, the NDAA is the annual policy bill that sets the rules and direction. It is separate from appropriations, which is where actual money shows up. In other words, Congress can order the Air Force to keep jets and then force the Air Force to scrounge couch cushions to pay for maintenance. Now, the conference bill language also sets a floor. It requires the Air Force to keep at least 103 A-10s through September 30th of 2026, and it mandates reporting to Congress about what happens next. So the headline is not A-10s are saved forever. The headline is more like A-10s are politically protected for a while. So if you want to understand why this matters for Ukraine, you have to understand what Congress just did to the Air Force's timeline. Now, the Air Force has been trying to retire the A-10 because it expects future wars to be fought in heavily contested airspace, where a slow, low-flying aircraft gets turned into a cautionary tale. That logic is not crazy, but Ukraine is not asking for a Warthog to fly joyrides over Crimea in daylight with Russian S-400s awake and caffeinated. Ukraine's problem set includes mass drone attacks, cruise missiles, cheap one-way strike drones, and a constant need for low-cost intercepts. And that is where the A-10 conversation gets interesting. Again, if the Air Force is required to keep a large slice of the fleet anyway, then the West has three options. Option one is to keep paying to operate them in U.S. service, even while the Air Force says they do not fit the plan. Option two is to keep them parked, minimally sustained, and hope Congress stops caring. And option three is to move some of that capacity to an ally fighting the exact kind of ugly, low-altitude, drone-saturated war that the A-10 was born to survive. And yes, that means Ukraine. So what's the Warthog's real value in 2025? Well, let's strip all the myth away from the aircraft for a second. The A-10 is not magic. It's not stealthy. It's not fast. And it's not a modern air superiority fighter. What it is a flying Gatling gun with a long loiter time, a thick skin for small arms damage, and a design built around getting hit and still coming home. In the drone era, the A-10's most relevant strengths are boring, and that's why they matter. It can stay up for a long time. That matters when you need persistent coverage over a sector that keeps getting probed by drones. It can carry a lot of ordnance and make multiple passes. That matters when you're trying to kill many cheap targets without burning through scarce, high-end missiles. It can fly slow enough to visually confirm targets when needed, and it has the cockpit visibility for it. That matters when a battle space is full of decoys, weird signatures, and Russian innovation, meaning a lawnmower engine strapped to a Mario Kart guidance kit. And it's built for austere ops. Ukraine lives in a world where runways, fuel farms, and maintenance hangars are all targetable at scale. Now, the hard truth, the A-10 cannot casually operate where Russian medium and long-range air defenses can engage it. If you send A-10s to Ukraine and fly them like it's Iraq in 2003, you will lose them. Ukraine would have to use them in a very controlled way. They would have to lean on terrain, timing, friendly air defenses, and mission selection. Ukraine already thinks like that because it has to. So the A-10 can still be relevant in drone defense in two ways. First, it can serve as a weapon truck for cheaper interceptions. The name of the game in Ukraine is cost exchange. You don't want to spend a $400,000 interceptor to kill a $20,000 drone unless you absolutely have to. Second, it can serve as a loitering presence that can respond fast when ground-based systems get saturated or when a drone slips through. Even then, you're not talking about A-10s replacing air defenses, you're talking about A-10s adding another layer. And air defense layers are how you survive in this war. So why does Congress keep doing this? Well, the NDAA language is not just about combat utility, it's about politics, local jobs, basing, and the fact that A-10 units live in real districts with real votes. Air Force leaders argue the A-10 is poorly suited for high-end contested warfare, but lawmakers push back, and they have blocked A-10 divestment multiple times in the past. That same dynamic is why this Ukraine idea keeps floating back to the surface. When Congress forces the Air Force to keep airplanes it didn't budget to keep, the pressure builds to find a use for them. And if the U.S. is going to pay to keep some portion of the fleet alive anyway, it's not unreasonable for people to ask whether a subset could be transferred, refurbished, and fielded where they actually solve a problem today. But let's not kid ourselves. If you want the honest assessment, the A-10 to Ukraine concept is possible, but it's heavy. Training pipelines would be significant. You have pilots, maintainers, weapons crews, and tactics development. Ukraine can learn fast, sure, but fast still takes time. Sustainment is the monster. The A-10 is old, and keeping it mission capable requires parts, maintenance capacity, and consistent logistics. Congress can keep the jets alive on paper, but you still need the real-world supply chain. Basing would be complicated also. Ukraine would need protected infrastructure, dispersal, deception, and rapid runway repair capacity. Now, they already do agile combat employment with their F-16s, but adding another fleet is always painful. Survivability would drive how they're used, and there is new information that Russia is putting R-60 missiles on Shahed drones now. If Russia can push an A-10 into an engagement zone, the A-10 loses that argument. So Ukraine would have to employ them in windows of opportunity, under air defense umbrellas, and against targets where the risk is worth the payoff. This is not a plug-and-play donation. This is a commitment and a doctrine donation. Now, let's deal with the elephant in the room, because every time the A-10 comes up, someone asks the same question. Would President Trump even allow this transfer? Well, based purely on the rhetoric, the answer looks like a hard no, because Trump has been openly skeptical of Ukraine aid, and he's framed support as unfair to U.S. taxpayers and repeatedly argued that Europe should carry more of the burden. Europe doesn't have A-10s, newsflash. But that does not sound like the guy who greenlights sending American attack aircraft into an active war. But Trump's foreign policy record doesn't really work that way. It's not ideological, it's transactional. Trump has approved arms transfers before when they served a purpose beyond altruism, when they shifted costs off the U.S. balance sheet, when they created leverage, when they could be framed as strength without committing American troops. And that's where the A-10 becomes politically weird in a way most people miss. The A-10 is not a shiny new system. The Air Force has tried to retire it for years, so Congress keeps blocking it. Keeping the fleet alive costs hundreds of millions of dollars annually, and the jet is increasingly irrelevant to how the U.S. expects to fight its next war. That creates a narrow but very real political argument. Not we're giving Ukraine advanced weapons, but we're getting rid of aircraft we don't need. Not we're escalating, but we're reducing costs. Not we're expanding the war, but we're offloading a problem Congress forced us to keep. That framing matters because if Congress is already forcing the Air Force to keep over 100 A-10s flying, a future administration inherits that problem, whether it wants to or not. At that point, the question stops being whether to keep the jets and becomes where they make the most sense. And this is where congressional pressure starts to matter more than presidential instincts. If lawmakers are blocking retirement, pushing Ukraine aid, and forcing the Air Force to fund aircraft it doesn't want, the decision space tightens. A president can slow things down, he can reshape the package, but an outright refusal starts to carry political cost. That said, there are clear red lines. If the transfer looks like escalation, it's dead. If it requires long-term U.S. sustainment, it's dead. If it locks Washington into Ukraine's war in a way that limits negotiation, it's dead. Trump has always been allergic to anything that smells like an open-ended commitment. So here's the honest takeaway. A Trump administration probably wouldn't seek an A-10 transfer to Ukraine, but under the right constraints, it might accept one, especially if it can be sold as a cost-saving, limited, and politically reversible measure. Now, that doesn't mean it will happen. It means it's no longer unthinkable. And in Washington, that's often the best first step. Okay, so here's what I want you to watch for next. Watch the appropriations bill. The NDAA sets policy, but the money has to show up somewhere. Watch for language about sustainment, transfer authority, or excess defense articles. And watch the operational lessons coming out of Ukraine, because this war has a habit of dragging every retired system back onto the stage and asking, can you still sing? Anyways, it's complicated. One last piece of the puzzle, Ukraine hasn't actually asked for A-10s yet, probably because they already have aircraft that are doing a really good job of hunting Shaheds. Still, I know my audience wants to see A-10s flying over the skies of Ukraine, with that beautiful Ukraine Trizub Trident right there on the tail of the A-10. I want to see that too. You're not alone. Just remember, it's possible, but it's unlikely. At least for now. If you want the next update the moment it drops, subscribe. It helps me push back on Russian disinformation and keeps Ukraine's fight top of mind for millions of my monthly viewers. We just hit 20 million views for the year of 2025. And that's because of y'all out there, my friends. Strategy. We're gonna get them terrorists. And as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.